What if a company that was objectively succeeding by every measurable metric, such as rising revenues, growing store count, rapid international expansion, was, at the exact same moment, quietly losing the very thing that had made it valuable in the first place? A company which achieved a revenue growth of 22% over the previous year, with its stock at an all-time high, operating more than 13,000 locations worldwide. And yet, within few months, the same company would be closing 600 underperforming stores, and in an unprecedented commercial decision, closing every single one of its self-operated American stores simultaneously for an afternoon of barista retraining. Its stock would fall by more than 70%. The company's own founder, who had stepped down as CEO 7 years earlier, would return urgently to take direct control. There was no fraud here, no misappropriation of funds. What happened here was a specific structural issue, one that can happen to any company that has grown to sufficient scale, and one that does not show up in the financial statements until it is already well underway. We are talking about Starbucks and the crisis it faced in between 2007 to 2009. Starbucks was founded in 1971 in Seattle by three partners, Jerry Baldwin, Zev Siegel, and Gordon Bowker. For the first 11 years of the company's existence, all Starbucks sold was roasted beans and home brewing equipment. In 1982, the founders hired a young marketing executive from New York named Howard Schultz to run retail operations. A year later, on a business trip to Milan, Howard Schultz walked into an Italian espresso bar and had a realization that would define the next 40 years of his life. He observed that the Italians were not just buying coffee, rather they were buying an occasion, a daily visit to a specific place where the barista knew them by name, where coffee was the pretext for a brief suspension of the rest of the day. Fascinated by this, he returned to Seattle, convinced that Starbucks should become that place in America. The founders declined the idea, and in 1985, Howard Schultz left Starbucks to start his own company. He called it Il Giornale, which is Italian for the newspaper, designed as the coffee bar Starbucks had refused to become. By 1987, Jerry Baldwin and Gordon Bowker had each independently arrived at the conclusion that they wanted out. Zev Siegel had already exited in 1980 when he sold his shares back to his two partners. Howard Schultz, running three small Il Giornale locations and the conviction that had never left him, raised $3.8 million and bought Starbucks, the company he had once worked for. He merged Il Giornale into Starbucks and kept the Starbucks name. His product was not primarily coffee. It was a specific experience: the lighting, the smell of roasting beans, the theatrical motion of the espresso machines below the counter, the handwritten names on the sides. Customers were not paying $4 for coffee, but for a brief daily occupation of a place that was neither their home nor their office. Through the 1990s, this model worked exceptionally well. Starbucks grew from fewer than 200 stores at the IPO in 1992 to more than 3,000 by the end of the decade. The brand became synonymous with American urban life. In June 2000, Howard Schultz stepped down as the CEO as he had grown more interested in the international expansion than in the operational demands of running a 15,000-person company day to day.
Starbucks CEO Howard Schultz has stepped down. He sent a letter to employees this morning saying, "Today, I am entrusting you all with Starbucks."
He moved into a newly created role of Chief Global Strategist and remained chairman of the board. Operational leadership was passed to Orrin Smith, a Starbucks finance executive who had served as CFO and then COO through the expansion years. Under Orrin Smith's 5 years as CEO, Starbucks roughly tripled in size. In 2005, Orrin Smith retired, and as his successor, the board chose Jim Donald, a seasoned American retail operator who had come from a background running supermarket chains, including the North American grocery division of Walmart and the Pathmark grocery chain. His mandate, broadly, was to accelerate growth. Under Jim Donald, Starbucks entered its most aggressive period of expansion. We break down corporate collapses and structural failures like this into clear, understandable systems. Subscribe if you find this analysis useful. Between 2000 and 2007, Starbucks grew from approximately 3,500 stores to more than 15,000. The pace required a specific kind of operational discipline and a specific set of decisions about how individual stores were built, operated, and staffed. Consider the espresso machines. The original Starbucks stores used La Marzocco machines, heavy Italian-made devices operated by hand. The entire process of preparing the coffee happened in full view of the customer, below eye level and at the counter. The noise, the aroma, the motion, and the visible competence of the person making the drink were part of the transaction. As the store count scaled, these machines were replaced with super-automatic machines to improve the efficiency. Push a button, the machine grinds, tamps, and extracts on its own. These machines were also taller. A customer standing at the counter could no longer see what was happening on the other side. The visible ritual was gone. And consider breakfast. In 2006, Starbucks introduced a line of warm breakfast sandwiches, as the food category represented a significant revenue opportunity. The sandwiches sold well, but also produced a strong, lingering smell of warming cheese and egg that overwhelmed what was left of the coffee aroma in the store. None of these decisions were mistakes in the conventional sense. Each one improved a specific operational metric, be it the speed of service, labor cost per transaction, or transaction size. Each one was justifiable to the board, the analysts, and the shareholders. In a spreadsheet, every change was an improvement. However, the decisions that could not be captured in a spreadsheet were the ones that mattered most. No line item in Starbucks' financial statements tracked the aroma of the store, or the fact that whether the espresso machines were visible. No KPI measured whether the customer still felt that they had gone somewhere, rather than just picked something up. What was being depleted did not appear on the balance sheet. It was the thing the company had been built on, and it was disappearing, one defensible decision at a time. On the morning of February 14, 2007, Howard Schultz, still chairman of the board, wrote a memo to the chief executive Jim Donald and his senior leadership team. The subject line was, "The commoditization of the Starbucks experience." Howard Schultz wrote that the company's 10-year expansion had required, in his words, a series of decisions that, in retrospect, have led to the watering down of the Starbucks experience and, what some might call, the commoditization of our brand. He specifically mentioned examples such as automated espresso machines, etc. The memo was intended for internal use only. However, within a week, it was leaked. Starbucks publicly confirmed its authenticity, and Jim Donald acknowledged the concerns and announced initiatives to address them. By early 2007, the same-store sales growth had slowed to about 5%, the smallest increase in 5 years, but was still positive. It is worth pausing to define that metric, because it becomes central to what happens next. Same-store sales, also called comparable store sales, is a measure specific to retail businesses. It tracks the revenue change only at stores that have been open for more than a year. What it actually captures is whether the existing base of stores is growing, shrinking, or holding steady, independent of how many new stores have been added to the total. This matters because a retailer's total revenue can rise, even while its individual stores are getting worse, as long as the company is opening new stores faster than the existing stores are declining. It can evidence of expansion outpacing deterioration. The same-store sales number is what separates the two. On January 30th, 2008, Starbucks reported its results for the first quarter of fiscal 2008. For the first time in the company's history as a public company, same-store sales had declined in the United States, down 1%. The number of transactions per store fell 3%. Total revenue still looked acceptable because new store openings continued to supply headline growth. But underneath the headline, the existing base of stores was generating fewer visits, and for those who did visit, fewer items per visit. The signal had arrived. The thing Howard Schultz had described in February 2007 was now visible in the quarterly numbers. And by then, the decision had already been made about what to do about it. One week before that earnings report was released, on January 7, 2008, Starbucks announced that Jim Donald was leaving the company and that Howard Schultz would return as chief executive, effective immediately. After being away from the role for 7 years and 7 months, his main focus was to bring back the Starbucks experience, which had not been a part of the company's public vocabulary since last few years. 49 days after his return, on February 26, 2008, Howard Schultz ordered every single one of the 7,100 company-operated Starbucks stores in the United States to close at 5:30 in the afternoon, local time, for 3 hours simultaneously, not for renovations, or for system maintenance, or for a public relations event, but for barista retraining. Specifically, for retraining on how to pull a proper espresso shot. The New York Times covered the closure under the headline, "Starbucks takes a 3-hour coffee break." The direct revenue loss was estimated at several $1,000,000, but the message it gave to the customers, that the Starbucks experience was back, carried much more importance, and that was the entire point. The problem Starbucks faced in its growth years has a specific name. When a retailer expands into a geography densely enough that new stores begin to steal customers from existing stores of the same chain, the phenomenon is called self-cannibalization. It is difficult to detect at the time of approval because each new store, viewed alone, meets the opening criteria. It becomes visible only in aggregate, when the existing store's traffic starts to decline in patterns that correlate with the opening locations. By the time the signal is unambiguous, the damage has already compounded. On July 1, 2008, Starbucks announced the closure of approximately 600 underperforming company-operated stores in the United States, of which around 70% of the stores had been open since the beginning of fiscal 2006. Roughly 12,000 full-time and part-time positions were affected, with many employees transferred to nearby stores. In January 2009, 300 additional stores were closed and additional 6,700 layoffs happened. The store closure was, in effect, a formal admission that the last 2 years of expansion had overshot. Other interventions followed through 2008 and 2009. The breakfast sandwich program was, for a period, discontinued, reformulated and reintroduced, with specifications designed to reduce the lingering smell. Lower-profile espresso machines were installed in some stores to restore visibility of the preparation process. On the financial front, capital expenditures were cut. Opening pace in the United States was reduced sharply, from a target of over 1,600 new American stores for fiscal 2008 to fewer than 200 for fiscal 2009. International expansion, by contrast, became a priority. The impact of the transformation was severe. Fiscal 2008 net earnings fell to approximately $316 million, down from $673 million the previous year, a decline of more than 50%. Same-store sales in the United States were down 5% for the full fiscal year. Into this operating environment, the 2008 financial crisis arrived, and consumer discretionary spending collapsed, resulting in lower demand for Starbucks. Same-store sales in the fourth quarter of fiscal 2008 fell 8% in the United States. For most of fiscal 2009, the decline continued. And yet, by fiscal 2010, the company recovered. Earnings per share more than doubled year over year. Same-store sales turned positive. The stock, which had fallen to below $8 in late 2008, climbed back towards its previous highs and then beyond them. By 2012, Starbucks was reporting record profitability. There is a conventional reading of the Starbucks turnaround that attributes the recovery to Howard Schultz's personal leadership qualities, his focus, his authority, and his relationship with the brand. That reading is not wrong, but it is incomplete. It treats the leader as the explanation, but leaves unexamined the more important structural question: why had the company needed the intervention in the first place? The answer lies in the nature of the asset that was being depleted. A company whose value comes from unit economics, from selling widgets at higher margins than competitors, can be managed primarily on numbers. Decisions can be validated against them. When the metrics turn negative, the source is usually identifiable. But a company whose value comes from an experience, a brand, a ritual, a third place, numbers alone are not sufficient. Measurable outcomes such as customer loyalty, pricing power, and defensibility against competitors are critical. The core asset of such a company does not appear on the balance sheet and cannot be audited. It can only be maintained by people who understand what it is and are willing to make decisions that protect it, even when a spreadsheet suggests otherwise. During the 2000 to 2007 expansion, Starbucks was managed by capable, experienced operators making individually defensible decisions, and each such decision improved a measurable metric. However, in aggregate, the decisions depleted the unmeasurable asset. What Starbucks revealed is that sometimes the crisis can be self-inflicted. The same stores, the same customers, and approximately the same product resulted in a collapse in 2007 and recovery by 2010. Nothing fundamental about the market had changed in these years. Neither did the competitors had weakened, nor did the input costs had fallen. What changed was the company's willingness to prioritize what it had stopped prioritizing. Starbucks survived because someone with standing was willing to say no to an operating logic that, if left unchecked, would have continued until there was nothing distinctive and unique left to protect. That sometimes we need to look between the lines of the spreadsheet and beyond what the numbers can show.